She stood in a school cafeteria with $2 and a question no child should ask. Can I buy half a billionaire? Saw her. One quiet choice changed a little girl's future and forced him to confront what his wealth had never given him: a family. Soren Vale had never stepped inside a public school before that Tuesday morning. At 32, he was known as the polished heir to Harbor and Hearth Markets, a grocery empire that stretched across half the country. His days were spent between glass towers, silent elevators, and conference rooms where people spoke about impact while checking their watches. But here he was, now standing in the cracked courtyard of East Harbor Elementary, holding cardboard boxes of food he had personally selected. Apples, bread, milk. Things that felt strangely heavier than balance sheets. The principal, Ms. Darnell, walked beside him, gratitude softening her tired face. "This will mean so much to our students," she said sincerely. Soren nodded, unsure how to respond. The donation was insignificant compared to his family's wealth, but the way she said "mean" made it sound like this food could change a child's entire day. "Would you like to see the cafeteria?" she asked. The question surprised him. He almost declined. Almost. "Yes," he said instead. "I would." Inside, the cafeteria buzzed with noise and life. Plastic chairs scraped the floor. Children laughed openly, food in their mouths, not caring who was watching. There was no performance here, no pretending. Soren stood near the wall, observing quietly, when something small caught his attention. A little girl in line. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her uniform was clean but faded, brown hair pulled into a slightly crooked ponytail. In her small hand, she clutched a few coins so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. She stared at them with intense focus, lips moving as she counted. For reasons Soren couldn't explain, his eyes stayed on her, and he felt for the first time in years that he was about to witness something that mattered. The girl stepped forward when it was her turn. Soren watched from a distance, unaware he had stopped breathing. "Ma'am," the girl said politely, holding out her hand. "Can I buy just half a sandwich?" The cafeteria worker paused. Her expression softened, but the rules didn't. "Sweetheart, we only sell whole sandwiches." The girl looked down at the coins in her palm, then at the sandwich behind the glass, then back at the coins again, like she was trying to force the numbers to change. "I only have $5, she said quietly. There was no whining, no tears, just honesty. The worker hesitated, torn between policy and compassion. "You can buy the whole one or I'll cover it." The words came from Soren's mouth before he fully realized he was moving. He stepped forward calmly, not drawing attention, not raising his voice. "I'd like a full meal for her," he said. "Whatever your best option is." The worker looked relieved and nodded quickly. The girl turned around. Her eyes were wide, not afraid, just curious, as if she were trying to understand how a stranger could suddenly change her day. A tray was placed in front of her, a sandwich, fruit and juice. She took it carefully, like it was something fragile. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but steady. Soren crouched slightly, lowering himself to her height. "What's your name, Junie?" she replied. "Junie Calder? I'm Soren. Nice to meet you, Junie." She smiled. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polite. It was real. And something deep in Soren's chest shifted quietly, permanently. Junie sat down with the other children, and Soren told himself it was time to leave. But he didn't move. He watched as Junie unwrapped her sandwich and took a bite. Then another. She looked satisfied, but before she finished, her eyes drifted to a boy across the table with an empty tray. Without hesitation, Junie picked up her apple. She broke it in half, then in quarters. She slid 3 pieces toward the boy, keeping only 1 for herself. No one told her to do it. No one praised her. She simply did. Soren felt his chest tighten. In his world, generosity was discussed in meetings and printed in annual reports. Here it happened quietly, without witnesses, without reward. Ms. Darnell appeared beside him. "That's Junie," she whispered. "She shares everything she has, even when it's not much." Soren nodded slowly. Junie looked up then and noticed him watching. She raised her hand and waved her smile unchanged. He waved back. As he walked out of the cafeteria, the sounds of children fading behind him. Soren felt different, not inspired, not proud, unsettled. That evening, his mansion felt colder than usual. The dining table was too long, the silence too loud. He lay awake thinking about $5, about a girl who asked for half a sandwich with dignity, about an apple split 4 ways. The next morning, Soren canceled his first meeting without explanation. He drove back toward East Harbor Elementary. This time he carried a paper bag filled with lunch, and a growing feeling that his life had just quietly changed direction. Recess filled the playground with motion and noise. Children ran in loose circles, shoes scraping concrete, laughter cutting through the cool air. Soren stood near the gate, scanning the chaos with unfamiliar patience. Then he saw her. Junie sat alone at a weathered picnic table, a small notebook spread open in front of her. She was drawing carefully, tongue peeking out in concentration, pencil moving with deliberate strokes. Soren approached slowly. "Hi, Junie." She looked up. Her face changed instantly, not shock, not fear, recognition. Her eyes brightened as if he had arrived exactly when expected. "You came back," she said. Before Soren could answer, Junie slid off the bench and ran to him, not recklessly, just fast enough to make her joy clear. She wrapped her arms around his leg in a quick, natural hug, like this was the most reasonable response in the world. Soren froze for half a second. Then he let himself breathe. "Of course I came back," he said softly. He set the paper bag on the table. Junie glanced at it, but only briefly. Her attention returned to him. "Want to sit?" she asked, already tugging gently at his sleeve. They sat side by side. Junie turned the notebook toward him. "I'm drawing the school." "Our school," Soren repeated. Junie nodded. "You come here now, so it's ours." The sentence landed with surprising weight. Soren opened the bag and placed the food on the table, sandwich, fruit juice. Junie's eyes widened, but she didn't rush. "Is this for me?" she asked. "Yes," Soren said. "All of it." Junie took one careful bite and closed her eyes. "It's really good," she whispered. Soren watched her eat, and for the first time in years, nothing else seemed urgent. They sat together while the playground buzzed around them. Junie drank her juice, slowly swinging her legs beneath the table. Soren watched her with a strange sense of calm, as if the world had temporarily slowed to match her pace. "Why did you come back?" Junie asked suddenly. The question was simple, honest, impossible to dodge. Soren smiled faintly. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Junie nodded, satisfied. "That makes sense." She took another bite of her sandwich, then said as casually as if discussing homework, "My mom's been worried." Soren's posture shifted slightly. Why, Junie shrugged. "Money stuff, grown-up papers." She didn't sound afraid, just observant. "She lost her job," Junie continued. "I was sick, so she stayed with me. Moms are supposed to do that." Soren felt something tighten in his chest. "How long ago?" he asked gently. "A few weeks," Junie said. "She's trying. She always tries." There was no resentment in her voice, no self-pity, only quiet trust. "When it rains," Junie added, "our ceiling drips. Mom puts a bowl under it. It goes plink plink all night." She smiled. "Sometimes I pretend it's music." Soren looked at her, struck by the way she transformed difficulty into something almost beautiful. "Do you get scared?" he asked carefully. "Sometimes," Junie admitted, "but Mom stays close, so it's okay." Junie finished her sandwich and wiped her hands neatly. "Do you have kids?" she asked. "No," Soren replied. "You'd be good," Junie said confidently. He laughed softly. "Why do you think that?" "Because you noticed me," she said. "And you came back." The bell rang. Junie slung her backpack on and waved. "I'll see you again, okay?" Soren watched her go, realizing she had just said something that changed him. Soren returned to his office late that afternoon. Meetings blurred together. Numbers filled the screens. Voices droned on about projections and margins. None of it held his attention. All he could see was Junie counting coins. All he could hear was the quiet certainty in her voice. That night, his mansion felt hollow. The dining table was long and untouched. The silence pressed in from every direction. He slept poorly. The next morning, Soren woke before his alarm with a strange clarity. He canceled his first meeting without explanation. Ignored the buzzing phone. Drove back toward East Harbor Elementary. This time he didn't hesitate. He stopped at a bakery and bought sandwiches. Fresh fruit. Juice. Cookies wrapped in bright paper. At the school, Ms. Darnell looked surprised when she saw him again. "The children were asking about you," she said warmly. "Is Junie here?" Soren asked. "She's at recess." Soren walked toward the playground with the bag in his hand and a steady feeling in his chest. Junie spotted him from across the yard. She ran. "Noah," she started, then corrected herself with a grin. "Soren." She hugged him again just as naturally as before. "You came back again," she said. "Yes," Soren replied. "I did." Junie looked up at him, serious now. "That means you're not pretending." Soren blinked. "Pretending what?" "Pretending to be nice," she said. "Some people do that." He knelt to her level, meeting her eyes. "I'm not pretending," he said quietly. Junie smiled, satisfied. And without realizing it, Soren had crossed a line he would never step back from. He hadn't planned it, but he had chosen it. The bell rang and children spilled out of the school doors like a living river. Junie waited at the curb with her backpack pulled tight against her shoulders. When she saw Soren standing nearby, her face lit up with quiet excitement. "You're here," she said. Like it mattered. "I am," Soren replied. "Ready to go home," Junie nodded. "Mom said I can walk today." They moved through the neighborhood together. The streets were narrower here, lined with modest houses and small porches, where people greeted each other by name. It was a slower world, one Soren had only ever seen through tinted windows. Junie talked the whole way about math class, about a girl who shared crayons with her, about how clouds looked different near the ocean. Then she stopped in front of a small 2-story house painted a soft, worn blue. "This is ours," Junie said proudly. "Mom says blue is the color of hope." The house wasn't new. The paint had faded, but the windows were clean and flower pots lined the porch. Junie unlocked the door herself. "Mom, I'm home," she called. "And I brought my friend." A woman appeared from the kitchen. She was young, late 20s maybe. Her hair was tied back, simply, her clothes clean but practical. There was tiredness in her eyes, but also warmth, the kind that came from surviving without losing kindness. Junie ran to her. "This is Soren. He's the man from school." The woman studied Soren for a brief, careful moment, protective, not suspicious. "I'm Maris," she said. "Junie's mom." "Soren," he replied. "Thank you for letting me walk her home." Maris nodded. "Junie talks about you." Inside, the house smelled like coffee and soap. Everything was tidy, intentional. Junie dropped her backpack and sat on the floor to draw, humming softly. Maris poured water into glasses and set one in front of Soren. "You've been very kind to my daughter. She's remarkable," Soren said honestly. Maris smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "She's had to be." Soren glanced toward Junie, who was already sketching something new. And for the first time, he felt like he had stepped into a story that was already unfolding, one that didn't need him to be loud or impressive. Only present. They sat at the small kitchen table while Junie colored on the floor nearby. Maris moved with quiet efficiency, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. There was no awkward hospitality, no attempt to impress, just care. "Junie says you sit with her at lunch," Maris said. "She likes that." "I like it too," Soren replied. "She explains things differently." Maris smiled. She notices everything. Junie looked up from her drawing. Mom, Soren makes clouds really good. Maris chuckled. That's an important skill. As Junie returned to her crayons, Maris's voice softened. I want you to know, I appreciate what you've done, but you don't have to feel responsible. Soren met her eyes. I don't. Maris seemed to study that answer. Then she nodded. She got sick a few weeks ago, Maris said after a pause. High fever. I stayed home with her. When I went back to work, they let me go. Soren felt his jaw tighten, but he stayed quiet. I'm looking for something new, Maris continued. We'll be okay. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was resolute. Junie crawled over and climbed into Maris's lap. Maris brushed hair from her daughter's face with practiced tenderness. We're a team, Junie said proudly. Yes, Maris replied. We are. Soren watched the two of them, struck by the strength in that small moment. I should go, he said finally. Maris walked him to the door. Thank you, she said again, for being kind to her. Soren hesitated, then answered, Thank you for raising someone who reminded me what kindness looks like. Maris looked surprised but deeply moved. As Soren stepped outside, the blue house glowed softly behind him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. He felt like he was being invited back. Soren returned the next evening, and the next. Sometimes he brought bread, sometimes fruit, sometimes nothing at all. No one questioned it. Junie treated his presence like weather expected comforting. One evening, Soren arrived to find Junie surrounded by paper and crayons on the living room floor. What are you drawing? He asked. Our family, Junie said without looking up. Soren paused. Our Junie nodded. Me, Mom, and you. He didn't correct her. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside her. Can I help? You can draw clouds, Junie said, handing him a blue crayon. Maris watched from the doorway, saying nothing. Later, Junie asked Soren for help with homework. Math, simple problems, but serious to her. Soren spread pencils on the floor and explained patiently. Junie listened intently, biting her lip as she counted. You're good at this, she said. So are you, Soren replied. When Junie finished, she leaned against him for just a moment, brief, safe, childlike, then ran off to brush her teeth. Maris sat beside him on the couch after Junie went to bed. She likes when you're here, Maris said quietly. It feels warmer? Soren nodded. For me too. There was silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that only exists when no one feels alone. Soren stood to leave but hesitated. I don't want to overstep, he said carefully. Maris met his gaze. You're not. That night, driving home, Soren realized something undeniable. He wasn't saving anyone. He was learning how to stay. And sometimes that was the most powerful choice a person could make. Rain tapped gently against the kitchen window that evening. Junie was on the living room rug, lining up toy figures and whispering stories, only she understood. Soren and Maris sat at the small table, mugs of tea growing cold between them. It was Maris who spoke first. She's growing fast, she said softly, watching her daughter. Too fast sometimes. Soren nodded. She sees more than most adults. Maris smiled, but there was weight behind it. That's not always a gift. Silence settled, comfortable, heavy. Soren hesitated, then chose his words carefully. Junie's father? Is he part of her life? Maris didn't flinch. She looked at Junie, then back at Soren. He left when I was pregnant, she said calmly. Never came back. No anger, no bitterness, just truth that had been carried long enough to stop hurting loudly. I was 19, Maris continued. I didn't have much. No family nearby. But when Junie was born, I knew I'd figure it out. Junie looked up suddenly. Mom's really good at figuring things out. Maris smiled. That's because I had to. Soren felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, respect. Was it hard, he asked. Maris exhaled slowly. Some days. Especially when she was sick. You don't think about yourself then, you just stay. Junie returned to her toys satisfied. Soren leaned back in his chair, understanding, settling in quietly. Maris hadn't lost her job because she was careless. She lost it because she chose her child. Later, when Junie went to brush her teeth, Maris spoke again, almost casually. I used to work as a cashier at harbor and hearth markets. The name struck Soren like cold water. That was his family's company. Maris noticed his reaction. You didn't know, she said gently. It's okay. But Soren was no longer listening. The pieces were already rearranging themselves in his mind. Soren didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom, replaying Maris's words over and over. Harbor and hearth markets. His phone sat untouched on the nightstand, glowing faintly with missed emails and alerts. None of them mattered. The next evening, he returned to the Blue House earlier than usual. Maris noticed immediately. You okay? She asked, setting down a plate. Soren nodded once, then shook his head. I need to understand something. Maris leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, not defensive. Prepared. Tell me what happened, Soren said quietly. At the store. Maris took a breath. Junie had a high fever. The doctor said I couldn't leave her alone. I called work every day. I brought the note. When I came back, the manager said 3 absences meant automatic termination. Her voice was steady, almost practiced. They didn't ask about Junie. They didn't read the note. Soren felt heat rise behind his eyes. That shouldn't have happened, he said. Maris shook her head gently. It did. And we survived? Junie wandered in holding a stuffed animal. Are we talking about the old job? Maris smiled. A little. Junie nodded solemnly. That was when you did math on paper late at night. Maris laughed softly. Yes, that time. Junie hugged her mother and wandered back to the living room. Soren stood. I'm going to fix this, he said, voice low but firm. Maris turned to him. Soren, I'm not doing this because I feel guilty. He continued. I'm doing it because it was wrong. Maris studied him for a long moment. And what does fixing look like, she asked. Soren met her gaze, changing the rules so this doesn't happen to anyone else. Maris nodded slowly. If you do that, it will matter. Soren understood then. This wasn't about undoing the past. It was about protecting futures. The conference room on the 23rd floor overlooked the entire city. Glass walls, steel table, familiar territory. Soren sat across from his father, Grant Vale, and the senior HR team, men and women who spoke fluently in metrics and margins. I want to talk about our leave policies, Soren began. An HR director sighed lightly. They're industry standard. Standard doesn't mean right, Soren replied. Grant leaned back. Where is this coming from? Soren didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He told a story. A single mother, a sick child. 3 days at home with a doctor's note. Fired when she returned. Silence filled the room. That manager followed policy, someone said. That policy failed, Soren answered. Grant frowned. You're talking about emotional exceptions. I'm talking about humane ones. They argued numbers, precedent, risk. Soren listened, then leaned forward. Do you know what employee turnover costs us? He asked. Do you know what loyalty is worth when people feel protected? Grant studied his son. You're different lately, he said. Soren nodded. I've been paying attention. He laid out proposals, protected medical leave for parents, flexible scheduling, clearer safeguards. This will cost money, an executive said. It will save people, Soren replied. And people build companies. Grant was silent for a long moment. Draft a pilot program, he finally said. Limited scope. Soren exhaled slowly. Thank you. As the meeting ended, Soren looked out over the city. For the first time, the glass and steel didn't feel like power. They felt like responsibility. And Soren was ready to carry it. The pilot program consumed Soren's life. For 3 weeks, his world became spreadsheets, late-night calls, and quiet arguments disguised as discussions. He sat through meetings where people spoke about risk exposure and policy abuse, while his mind returned again and again to a 6-year-old counting coins in a school cafeteria. He didn't tell Maris everything. Not yet. He didn't want her to feel like she was waiting on a decision made behind glass walls. Whatever happened, he wanted it to be solid, earned, not gifted. At Harbor and Hearth headquarters, Soren rewrote policies line by line: emergency parental leave, protected absences with medical verification, flexible schedules for single parents, training for managers to recognize family crises without punishment. Employees will take advantage, someone warned. Soren didn't raise his voice when he answered. People who are treated like adults usually act like adults. At night, he still went to the Blue House. Sometimes he helped Junie with math. Sometimes he sat quietly while Maris cooked. Sometimes he fixed small things around the house, a loose cabinet handle, a sticking window. Nothing dramatic, nothing that crossed boundaries. Just presence. One evening, Junie brought him a drawing. It showed 3 figures under a big blue sky. The clouds were uneven, layered, familiar. You're the tall one, Junie explained. Soren smiled. I figured. Maris watched from the kitchen, arms folded loosely, something thoughtful in her expression. Later, after Junie went to bed, Maris poured tea. You've been busy, she said. Soren nodded. Trying to be. She studied him. Whatever you're doing, thank you for not making it feel like charity. Soren met her gaze. I wouldn't do that to you. That night, alone in his apartment, Soren stared at his laptop until dawn. He added one more clause to the proposal. A new internal role. Not for optics, not for public relations. A position designed to support employees navigating family hardship, someone who understood the reality, not just the rules. He didn't write Maris's name, but he thought of her with every word. 3 days later, the board approved the pilot. Limited, controlled, monitored, but real. Soren leaned back in his chair as the vote concluded. For the first time, he didn't feel victorious. He felt responsible, and that he realized was heavier than power, but infinitely more meaningful. Soren arrived at the Blue House earlier than usual that Thursday. Junie opened the door before he knocked. You're early, she announced. That means something important. Soren smiled. You're very observant. I know, Junie said, stepping aside. Mom's in the kitchen. The house smelled like soup and fresh bread. Maris stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up. She turned when she heard footsteps. Everything okay? She asked immediately. Soren nodded but didn't sit. Can we talk? He asked. Just us. Maris turned down the heat and gestured to the table. Junie looked between them. I'll draw, she declared, already moving toward the living room. Soren waited until Junie was absorbed in her paper before placing a manila envelope on the table. Maris frowned slightly. What's this? Soren kept his voice calm. Something I want you to read. No pressure, no obligation. Maris opened the envelope slowly. Her eyes moved across the page, then back again. She inhaled sharply. This is a job, she said carefully. Yes. Maris read aloud softly, disbelief threading her voice. Employee Care and Family Support Coordinator. Benefits, flexible hours. Health care for Junie. She looked up. This is a real position. It is, Soren said. We created it as part of the new policies. Someone has to make sure families don't fall through the cracks. Maris swallowed. And you thought of me. I thought of someone who understands, Soren replied. someone who lived it. Maris leaned back in her chair, hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the sudden release of constant tension. This isn't because of me knowing you, she said slowly. No, Soren answered immediately. This is because the system failed you and others like you. Maris stared at the papers for a long moment. Then she folded them carefully and set them down. I accept, she said. The word came out quietly, firmly. Soren blinked. You don't want time to think, Maris shook her head. I've been thinking about this kind of stability for years. Junie appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. Is it good news? Maris stood and knelt, hugging her daughter. It's very good news. Junie looked at Soren. Did you help? Soren crouched. I just made sure people listened. Junie nodded seriously. That's important. That night they ate together, nothing fancy. Soup, bread, quiet laughter. For the first time since Soren had met them, Maris slept without setting an alarm to check bills. And for the first time in a long while, Soren felt like the future was no longer something he had to outrun. The changes came quietly. Maris started her new role on a Monday morning, nervous but steady. She pinned her badge to her jacket like it meant more than employment. It meant recognition. Junie started carrying a new backpack, not because it was expensive, but because it was chosen without fear. Soren noticed the smallest difference first. Junie stopped counting coins. One afternoon, Soren stood near the cafeteria wall again, watching as Junie moved through the lunch line. She glanced at the menu, chose carefully but not anxiously. She bought a full sandwich, then turned and shared part of it anyway. Ms. Darnell approached Soren with a smile. She's lighter, the principal said. Something's changed. Soren nodded. Yes, it has. At home, Maris no longer stayed up late doing math on scrap paper. Evenings were quieter, not with worry, but with rest. One night, Junie asked Soren, "Are you staying for dinner?" Soren hesitated out of habit, then stopped himself. "Yes," he said. "If that's okay." Maris met his eyes. "It is." After dinner, Junie taped a new drawing to the refrigerator. 3 figures holding hands beneath uneven clouds. At the bottom, in careful letters, "My family." Soren stared at it longer than necessary. Maris stood beside him, not rushing the moment. "She drew that for school," Maris said gently. "Family doesn't need a definition, apparently." Soren smiled, voice quiet. "She's right." Later, when Junie was asleep, Soren and Maris sat on the porch. The neighborhood hummed softly around them. "I don't want to rush anything," Soren said. "I just want to be here." Maris nodded. Being here is already a lot." They sat in silence, comfortable, unforced. No promises spoken, none needed. Inside the house, Junie slept peacefully, unaware that her quiet dignity had reshaped 2 adult lives. And Soren understood something clearly. Finally, the most meaningful rescues don't look like dramatic saves. They look like consistency, like fairness, like staying. The first real test didn't arrive in a boardroom. It arrived in an email. A simple subject line that could have belonged to any ordinary workday, except it made Soren's hands go cold the moment he saw it. Pilot program review concern from regional leadership. He read it once, then again. Not because the words were complicated, because they were familiar. The tone of cautious resistance. The careful language people used when they wanted to stop something, without saying they wanted to stop it. Maris was 3 weeks into her new role, and she was already doing what she had been hired to do, listening to employees, and turning their quiet problems into solvable systems. She had created a clear process for parental leave requests. She had trained managers to respond with professionalism and empathy. She had built a hotline system so store employees could ask for help without fear of being misunderstood. It was working. And that was exactly why it was scaring certain people. That afternoon, Soren drove to the Blue House with his shoulders locked and his tie loosened, like it was trying to escape his throat. He sat in the car for a long moment before going inside, staring at the porch light, fighting the instinct to keep his worry private. Because the truth was, he didn't want Maris to feel like a project was failing on her back. He walked in and found her in the kitchen, papers spread neatly beside a cup of coffee. Junie was at the table, drawing, humming softly, her feet swinging. Maris looked up. She didn't smile right away. "You got the email," she said quietly. Soren nodded. "I did." Junie glanced between them, sensing the shift in the room the way children do without panic, just awareness. She went back to her drawing, making her pencil strokes slower, as if giving the adults space to be careful. Maris folded the papers and took a breath. "They're saying the pilot is too generous," she said, voice controlled. "That it'll encourage dependency." Soren's jaw tightened. Dependency on what? Being treated like a person. Maris gave him a faint look that was half tired, half determined. "They're afraid it will change how managers maintain discipline." Soren leaned against the counter, forcing himself to stay calm. He didn't want Junie to see anger. He wanted Junie to see adults handle conflict responsibly. Maris continued. "One regional manager wants to scale the program down, make it harder to qualify, add steps, add delays." Soren exhaled slowly. "So people give up." Maris nodded once. "That's usually the point." Junie lifted her head. "Is this about your new job?" Maris softened instantly. "A little baby." Junie blinked thoughtfully. "If it's a job that helps people, why would anyone want it smaller?" Soren looked at the child and felt something in his chest break open quietly, cleanly. Maris reached over and squeezed Junie's hand. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared of change." Junie nodded like that answer made sense. Then she added casually, devastating in its innocence, "But change can be good. Like when I got a whole sandwich." Soren swallowed hard. Maris looked at him. Her eyes said everything her voice didn't. "This is why we can't lose." That night, after Junie fell asleep, Soren and Maris sat on the porch with the kind of silence that carried meaning, like a third person in the conversation. "I don't want you pulled into a war," Maris said softly. Soren turned to her. "It's not your war. It's mine." Maris's voice stayed steady. "I don't want them saying you only did this because of us." Soren leaned forward, elbows on his knees, speaking carefully. "Then we make it bigger than us. We make it undeniable." Maris studied him. "What do you mean?" "I mean data, results, stories, turnover rates dropping, attendance improving, people staying because they feel safe." Maris's lips pressed together. "And if they still push back," Soren looked out at the street where porch lights glowed like small promises, "then they'll be pushing against who I've decided to be." Maris let that sit between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, just true. Soren stood and faced her, voice low. "Tomorrow I'm going back upstairs, not to argue, to protect what's right." Maris nodded slowly. "Then I'll bring the reports, the real ones. The ones that show what policies look like when they touch real families." Soren felt a strange calm settle over him. Because for the first time he wasn't fighting for profit. He was fighting for the kind of world Junie could grow up believing in. Harbor and Hearth headquarters looked the same as always. Cold glass, bright floors, a lobby that smelled like expensive air. But Soren walked in, feeling like the building belonged to a different version of him, one that existed before a little girl asked to buy half a sandwich with $5. The meeting was scheduled for 1 hour. It lasted 3. Grant Vale sat at the head of the table, face unreadable, hands folded like he was listening to numbers instead of people. Regional managers joined by video, their voices crisp, cautious, practiced. Soren spoke first, steady and professional. "We're here to review the pilot results," he said. "Not hypothetical fears, real outcomes." A regional manager cleared his throat. "We support families, of course, but the program is being interpreted broadly." Soren didn't bite. He asked calmly, Do you have evidence of abuse? The manager hesitated. Not abuse exactly, but we're worried it could become. Soren lifted a hand gently. Let's stay with facts. He nodded toward the door, and Maris entered. She didn't enter like someone seeking permission. She entered like someone carrying proof. Her blazer was simple. Her posture was straight. Her eyes were tired but clear, the eyes of a woman who had carried responsibility long before she had a title. Soren introduced her. This is Maris Calder, our Employee Care and Family Support Coordinator. She's here to present the pilot report. A few people looked surprised. One executive's eyebrows lifted in silent judgment. Maris didn't flinch. She placed the reports on the table, then began. In 5 pilot stores, she said, we saw a measurable drop in turnover. We saw increased employee satisfaction. We saw fewer unplanned absences because employees no longer felt they had to hide emergencies. A manager interrupted. That sounds nice, but these policies cost money. Maris nodded. They cost money. Turnover costs more. She turned a page with calm precision. When employees believe they'll be treated fairly, they plan better. They communicate sooner. They return with loyalty instead of resentment. Soren watched the room shift, not toward softness, but toward logic. Then Maris added the part that wasn't on the spreadsheet. I also spoke with employees, she said. Dozens. And what they said wasn't about perks. It was about dignity. Silence. Grant Vale leaned forward slightly. Define dignity. Maris held his gaze. Dignity is a parent not having to choose between a sick child and a paycheck. Dignity is bringing a doctor's note and being met with professionalism instead of coldness. Dignity is not being punished for being responsible. One regional manager frowned. But if we relax standards, we lose discipline. Soren's voice stayed calm, but the steel underneath it was unmistakable. Discipline isn't cruelty. Discipline is clarity. We can have standards without stripping people of humanity. Grant stared at his son for a long moment. This is personal to you. Soren didn't deny it, but he didn't let it shrink the truth. It became personal when I realized our policies can harm good families, he said. But that doesn't make it less valid. It makes it urgent. The room went quiet. Grant turned to Maris. You were a cashier once. Maris nodded. Yes, and you were dismissed for absences related to your child's illness. Maris spoke evenly, refusing drama. Yes. Grant's eyes flicked to Soren, then back to Maris. And you still came here and built this program. Maris nodded again. Because I don't want any other parent to go through that. Grant leaned back, exhaling slowly. Soren waited. He didn't push. He didn't threaten. He simply let the truth remain where it belonged, on the table. Finally, Grant spoke. We expand the program, he said, voice firm. Gradually, with oversight. But we expand. One executive opened his mouth as if to protest. Grant cut him off with a single look. And we retrain managers, Grant continued. If the system is failing good people, then the system changes. Soren felt his chest loosen like a knot being untied. Not triumph, relief. As the meeting ended, Maris gathered her papers. Her hands were steady, but when she passed Soren, he saw it in her eyes, quiet shock at the fact that she had just helped shift an empire. In the elevator, Maris exhaled and whispered, almost disbelieving, We did it. Soren looked at her. You did it. Maris shook her head once. No. We. And for the first time, that word didn't feel like a wish. It felt like a future. That weekend, the Blue House felt different. Not bigger, not richer, just lighter. The porch plants looked greener. The air smelled like coffee and warm bread. Junie ran around the yard with a jump rope, laughing so freely it sounded like she'd forgotten what worry felt like. Soren arrived with a small bag of groceries, habit now not performance. He also arrived with something else inside him, a calm certainty that scared him more than any business confrontation ever had. Because it wasn't about money. It was about commitment. Inside, Maris was folding laundry while Junie colored at the table. The refrigerator still held Junie's family drawing edges curling slightly. Junie looked up. "Soren, we have a new thing." Soren smiled. "What's the new thing?" Junie held up a paper with careful handwriting. "My family rules," she announced proudly. Soren leaned closer. "Family rules." Junie nodded, serious like a judge. "Rule 1, we eat together when we can." Maris covered a smile with her hand. She made that up. Junie continued. "Rule 2, we tell the truth, but gently." Soren felt something warm spread through his chest. Junie pointed at Rule 3. "Rule 3, we help people." Maris's eyes softened. "That one's from you," she told Soren quietly. Junie added Rule 4. "If someone is sad, we don't ignore them." Soren looked at Maris, then really looked and saw the small exhaustion still there. The kind that doesn't disappear just because life improves. It was the exhaustion of years of being strong alone. Junie ran off to play again. The house quieted. Maris folded one last shirt, then sat across from Soren at the kitchen table. She didn't speak for a long moment. Soren waited. Presence, patience, the skills Junie had accidentally taught him. Maris finally said Grant approved the expansion. Soren nodded. He did. Maris's voice was soft. "You know what that means. It means families will be protected," Soren replied. Maris swallowed. "It means the company is changing. Because you changed." Soren looked down at his hands. The hands that had signed contracts, approved budgets, shaken 1,000 formal hands. Now those hands wanted to be worthy of a child's trust. He spoke carefully. "Maris, I've been thinking." Maris's posture didn't tense, but her eyes sharpened. Protective instincts, not fear. Soren continued gently. "I don't want Junie to ever wonder if I'm going to disappear. Not because of a fight, not because of a schedule, not because life gets complicated." Maris's throat moved as she swallowed emotion back into control. "Soren." He held up a hand, not stopping her, asking for one moment to finish. "I'm not asking you to rush," he said. "I'm not asking you to label this before you're ready. I'm asking to make something clear." Maris whispered. What Soren's voice lowered. "I'm here, and I'm staying." Maris blinked, eyes shining but steady. "That's a big promise." Soren nodded. "I know. That's why I'm saying it like this." Maris stared at him for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. Quiet. Real. No fireworks. Just a woman allowing herself to believe in consistency. "I've lived my life expecting people to leave," Maris admitted softly. "Not because they're evil. Because life happens." Soren squeezed her hand gently. "Then let me be the kind of life that stays." Maris exhaled, and the sound was almost a laugh and almost a cry. In the living room, Junie suddenly appeared holding her newest drawing. She held it up like a flag. It was the blue house again, the sky full of uneven clouds, 3 figures, and this time Junie had drawn a fourth, a big heart hovering above them like a protective balloon. "What's that?" Soren asked carefully. Junie beamed. "That's the part you can't see." Maris's eyes closed for a second, overwhelmed but safe. She opened them and smiled at Junie. Junie climbed into Soren's lap for a brief, childlike hug, then hopped down satisfied, like she'd completed her role as the smallest architect of a family. Soren looked at Maris. Maris looked back, and without needing a grand speech, they both understood. This wasn't a rescue story. It was a belonging story. A story where a child stayed protected, a mother kept her dignity, and a man finally learned that the most powerful word in the world isn't profit. It's present. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. No headlines, no breaking news. Just light pouring through the kitchen window of the blue house. Maris moved calmly, packing Junie's lunch. Not rushed, not calculating. No scrap paper, no late-night math lingering behind her eyes. Junie sat at the table, swinging her feet, humming while she zipped her backpack. "Soren," she said suddenly, "today, I have enough for a whole lunch." Soren looked up from his coffee. "That's good." Junie nodded seriously. "But I'm still going to share if someone forgets." Maris smiled, watching the exchange. The difference wasn't in Junie's kindness, it was in her freedom to choose it. At school, Soren walked Junie to the gate. She hugged him once, brief, childlike safe, then ran off without looking back. She didn't need to check if he'd stay. She already knew. Later that day, Maris sat in her new office at Harbor and Hearth, reviewing her first full report. Not as a former cashier, not as a special case, as a professional. Her phone buzzed with messages from store managers thanking her for clear guidance, from employees relieved to finally understand their options. Maris closed her eyes for a moment and breathed. Not relief alone, pride. That evening, they ate dinner together, nothing fancy. Soup, bread, quiet conversation. Junie talked about clouds. Soren listened like it mattered, because it did. For the first time, life didn't feel like something they were surviving. It felt like something they were building. Together. The weeks that followed weren't dramatic. They were consistent. Soren didn't show up every day. He showed up reliably, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays when he could, always without announcement. He fixed a loose step on the porch, replaced a flickering light, taught Junie how to ride her bike running beside her until she shouted, "I've got it," and she did. Maris noticed the smallest changes in herself. She slept through the night. She laughed more easily. She stopped bracing for the next problem before it arrived. One evening, as Junie did homework on the floor, Maris watched Soren patiently explain subtraction using crayons. "You're good at this," Maris said quietly. Soren looked up. "She's good at learning." Junie beamed, "Because he listens." That night after Junie went to bed, Maris and Soren sat on the porch again. "I don't need promises," Maris said softly. "I need consistency." Soren nodded. "Then that's what I'll give." Maris studied him. "Life gets complicated," I know, Soren replied. "That's why I'm choosing this anyway." No dramatic declaration followed, just two adults agreeing calmly, intentionally, that presence mattered more than perfection. Inside the house, Junie slept peacefully. Outside, the streetlights glowed. And in that ordinary moment, something extraordinary had already happened. They weren't pretending to be a family. They were practicing being one. Sunday afternoon was quiet. Junie lay on the couch, half asleep, clutching a teddy bear. Maris and Soren sat at the kitchen table with coffee that had long gone cold. "How long has it been?" Maris asked. Soren thought for a moment. "Almost a year." Maris nodded. "Feels longer. In a good way." They stood together in front of the refrigerator. Junie's drawings covered the surface house's cloud stick figures holding hands. One picture stood out. 3 figures beneath a blue sky. A heart floating above them. Underneath, in careful handwriting, "My family." Soren stared at it. Maris watched him, not rushing the moment. "It's accurate," Soren said quietly. Maris smiled. "She has a way of knowing things before we say them out loud." Junie stirred and opened her eyes. "Are you still here?" she asked sleepily. "I am," Soren replied without hesitation. "And I'm staying for dinner." Junie smiled and drifted back to sleep, satisfied. Maris reached for Soren's hand. Not tight, just enough. No contracts were signed. No speeches were made. But a choice had been confirmed. Family, Soren had learned, wasn't something you announced. It was something you showed again and again until a child never had to ask if you'd stay. And in that small blue house under uneven clouds and quiet laughter, Soren Vale finally understood. The most powerful legacy a person could leave wasn't wealth. It was presence. And he had chosen it. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.